Welcome everyone. Thanks for waiting. While Sammy is getting this up, I'm having technical difficulties here. Feeling like it's Mercury retrograde, but it's wonderful for everyone to be joining. Thank you, Sammy, for sharing the introduction and sharing Woke and Woke's mission. And we are thrilled to be welcoming two wonderful women, Muna and Jill, to talk about marketing and branding in the cannabis sector, which is complex. There is a lot to it. So thank you everyone for being here. We'd like to start off with inviting both Jill and Muna to share a little bit about themselves and kind of what's brought them to the cannabis plant. So I'll ask Jill to go ahead and go first.
Okay, just jump right in. Hi, my name is Jill Goldsberry, and I'm a publicist in the media relations and strategy space. I've been in this industry for about 15 years. I come from an entertainment and consumer background. How I got into cannabis was kind of an accident during the 2020, around 2019, I was thinking about it and wondering, well, how would I get into that industry? Because I saw it booming, and 2020 happened, and I was able to connect with other media people from different areas, and it just seemed as though everyone was reaching out to just connect. So one of my colleagues suggested going to a convention with her, an expo in New York that was focused on the cannabis industry as far as finance and other things that people in the business owners in the cannabis industry needed. So I thought it was interesting, and that's kind of where it started from there, and just started making connections and networking, and here we are. A year later, I'm fully in it now.
Hi, my name is Muna. Can you all hear me? It's raining quite loudly. I'm by a window, so I wanted to make sure. Okay. My name is Muna. I'm based out of, actually I'm based out of New York and Nashville. I'm a Southern girl at heart. So I, like Jill, stumbled into the cannabis industry. I started out, I was always a STEM kid, and I was really great at math and science, but I really loved fashion and beauty and just cool creative things. So I wanted a vehicle to be able to do those things without having to be an artist myself, which is what brought me to the marketing and branding side. And then getting into cannabis was actually through my work. So I worked at a marketing and strategic communications consultancy. And I remember when I was interviewing for the role, like they just casually said, like, how do you feel about cannabis? And I was like, I mean, I'm interested, like I'd love to learn more. And it kind of was on the back burner. But over about a year and a half, it kind of creeped into our work more and more until we were bringing on more cannabis clients. And I essentially was, at a certain point, just kind of jumped off the deep end and really got to dig deeper into certain client projects and saw the opportunity to kind of do new and interesting things. And then I officially, at that point, considered myself part of the cannabis industry, just by way of having a marketing job at an agency.
You're on mute.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you very much for sharing that. We need your expertise in this field because it's complex. It's coming from the mainstream as well, and transferring that into this space is really important. And it's not just a willy-nilly thing. There's a lot to learn, a lot to take in, a lot of history, a lot of legislation, from the plant to politics and everything in between. What marketing and brand and the role it plays to be advocating for this plant is very, very valuable and important. So thank you both for joining this side. So I'd like to go into the next slide, Sammy, please. And the concept around marketing and branding even just understanding the terms around marketing and branding can get a little all over the place because there are a lot of pieces to it. So for today's conversation, we're hoping to identify the possible career opportunities because there's a lot. Learn about the description and duties for different marketing and brand roles because again, it can be different for different teams and different projects and different agencies as well, including the government as well. And we want to help clarify the qualifications for a career in cannabis and marketing and brand in cannabis. So today should be fun. It's going to be a lot that we can hopefully share and learn from Muna and Jill today. And it's quite a bit. So can we talk a little bit about marketing and brand and what that means in your respective roles right now? We can start with marketing if we want, or we can start with brand. And Muna, will you kind of give a little insight to start?
Yeah, so I like to say that brand is how people think, feel, and want to interact with your company or your products, and marketing is how you get them to feel that way. So it's kind of the pathway to brand. And like you mentioned, and that marketing and branding can mean 10,000 different things. If you Google what is marketing or what is brand or branding, there's a lot of different things that come up. So it's also specific to like even where you work, if you're internal versus external, or like at your specific agency, or even what part of the sector you are in within cannabis. But a general rule of thumb is that marketing is actionable, and brand is ethos, essence, perception, and a relationship more than anything.
I agree. Jill, what's your take on it?
I agree with what you said about that. There's definitely the relationships, and speaking more from a PR standpoint, it is really all about the relationships that you build in various areas. And I would definitely, I look at whatever the product is or the project, because I'm looking at it from a PR standpoint, not really integrating it with marketing. Because for me, marketing could be a certain type of marketing, and it usually has something to do with social or external marketing or experiential marketing. So that's where I will connect with marketing. So
yeah, I feel like I agree with both of you as well. Like this planned activity with marketing, and the brand is this consistent engagement and being really considerate and thoughtful and allocating resources and attention to strategically build your brand. So those are some key kind of words around brand and marketing. Would you all agree around like brand is the identity, building the trust, the design, the reputation, personality, the voice, not just a logo and not just a font, not just a website. And then marketing feels in marketing with the whole with PR, promotion, social media, advertising, just both creating the value and the message around the brand.
a lot of PR is what your tactics are, what's actionable. And with, like you said, with branding, it's the vibe, the feeling you get when you see said logo. Like with McDonald's, what do you think of? You know, what's that feeling that you're getting from it? What's created? You know, when you smell the fries, what do you know, that's marketing right there. That air pump of fry smell, it makes you want it. Or like the popcorn marketing. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I love popcorn, so it works for me.
There's nothing on it. You all hear me very well, or?
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay.
Sweet. So I'd like to ask from your respective experience and offering some sort of advice for someone who's interested in transferring their professional career into the cannabis and hemp industry and market? Like what's some few nuggets to share of wisdom with folks who are listening and watching?
Jill, do you want to go first with that?
You were gonna say that. Well, okay. So, I mean, I'm coming from a very general type of, actually, maybe it's not general, because I started in entertainment in the hip hop industry. So you're around cannabis all the time anyway. It was just there. And then went into more of like consumer type of PR, brand, not really brand strategy, but media outreach and things of that nature. So I would say that you really have to look at what your skill set is and what's transferable. Because if you have the basics down where you know how to pitch, you know how to connect brands with other brands, and you have your brand marketing down, you can take that skill anywhere to any type of product, any type of, anything you're doing. You could just apply it to that. And I think it's really important to have marketable, transferable skills and know what those skills are and be able to identify them, because there are lots of companies that, and even before entering cannabis, like I knew that I had transferable skills. I'm sure Muda, you know this too, your skills are transferable, but you may apply for a job or you may talk to a potential client and they don't believe that you can do the job because they haven't seen you do it before. But you know that you can do it because you have the skills. It's just applying it to this brand or product, whatever it is. So I think that it's really important to know your marketable skills and be able to execute them and be able to convince whoever you need to convince that those skills will apply to whatever it is that you're doing or what they need you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jill.
I agree with all of those things, and really know thyself in a way, and even ask for outside input. Sometimes it's hard to know your skills because they just come so naturally to you. So getting outside perspective from friends or family or even coworkers, say like, what am I good at? What do you come to me for? What have I done most impressively throughout my time knowing you? So I definitely agree with that. Second thing I would say is, as terms of advice, is like, don't be intimidated. I think that one of the things that can be really uncomfortable or scary or even awkward when you're transitioning into a new industry, specifically like cannabis, is that even though the industry is young, you may be around people who have been in the game for a while, who kind of know who's who and what's what. But regardless of like where you come from, if you are looking to come into the cannabis industry, you have a unique perspective and a fresh take and a point of view to bring. So don't get caught up in like who knows the most or who's the smartest person in the room. And really just think about like, what do you have to offer? What can you bring to the table? Because like Jill was saying, like they're all transferable skills. So knowing what those are and making sure you speak to those is really important.
Yeah, like you can like be curious, but don't drink the can of Kool-Aid and like think that you're gonna nothing wrong with Kool-Aid for anyone who wants to drink that, but you know what I'm saying? Like it is good to like know what you're coming in there for, because there's some shysters that like, try to throw on over you, and it's not exclusive to this space as well. So knowing thyself and transferring and knowing your strengths from mainstream that would be applicable to here. And plus you're also not like, tainted by all the, other stuff that goes on in the space, which we will get into to share real talk about what that can look like in for those who may have experienced it or might experience.
And also, can I just interject something here?
Yes. Yeah.
There was something that Muna had said about it being a new industry. And that's something that I think people really need to keep in mind, that it is a new industry, because whatever you've been doing it before this industry started booming. So when someone tells you, oh, well, we really need someone with experience doing this, I would just say, what are you talking about? This is a new industry. Everyone's got experience. You need to take your experience and apply it to this industry. And that's something, because someone actually said that to me. Well, we need someone with experience in this industry. No one has experience in this industry. It's very new. It's the wild, wild west right now. And processes are being set up. Legislation's changing constantly. So we don't know what the final roadmap is going to look like. It's forming now.
So true, Jill. Yeah, so for everyone who's tuning in now or later, even 5-10 years from now, it's still considered like the new, and different markets have different stage of maturation and have been operational in one way, shape, or another. So I feel like getting in now is a great place and a great time. Like, you're not late. There's a long way to go, both here domestically in the States and globally. So just to kind of plant that seed with everyone who's connecting here. Really great tips. I hope everyone is resonating with that, because it sure is with me. And I want to just pop on to the next question about some of the do's and the don'ts of marketing in brand in this space, both in cannabis and in hemp. Curious what y'all have to say. I'd love for Muna to share, because I feel like there are some more compliance things related in brand and marketing. PR, you might get a little around it, except for who you're doing PR from, like different officials, let's say. So Muna, if you will start kind of sharing a bit of those do's and the don'ts.
So with do's and don'ts, the one thing that I think that's really interesting about cannabis in terms of like marketing and getting experience is that I kind of came to cannabis by way of like fashion and beauty and lifestyle, and there are a lot of people who transfer into those industries through like having their own personal blogs or being social media influencers in and of themselves, or kind of being able to showcase what they've done before. But of course with cannabis, social media and paid advertising can be a bit, I'm going to call it murky, simply because there are some people who can get around it if you know to do the right things or know the right people. But in terms of, I guess, don'ts, I would start with is that don't rely on social media, at least not right now. I mean, there's a lot of things that are changing, but especially with Instagram and TikTok being such a huge part of what marketing is these days, that there are very few brands that are putting all of their eggs in that basket, because it's just so unreliable, and there's so many regulations, and cannabis brands are being shut down, like their accounts are being shut down every day. So in that sense of if social media is an interest that you have, or kind of a way that you want to get into marketing and branding, think about it a little bit more broadly, because there are going to be few rules, if any, that are strictly about social media. In terms of do think of the cannabis industry as you would as any other industry when thinking of like who can participate or who would participate. I think when thinking about marketing and branding for cannabis, we often think of like the typical leaf and the super greens, like the people who are smoking and taking edibles and doing all of that like all the time. But I'm using the language of like CannaCareers versus CannaConfident. There's so many people who could be cannabis consumers who just haven't had the chance to try it or think about it or resonate with it in that way. So when thinking about what marketing and branding can be done, there are a lot of exciting opportunities to be thinking about the customer or the consumer that like hasn't been marketed to yet, because they aren't consuming cannabis yet. There are tons of people who aren't like recreational users, or at least explicitly so. So that would be like my top do and my top don't. And kind of a second thing just to keep in mind is like, don't let where you are now, or like kind of your geography dictate like what you think you can do. So like I said, I'm from Oklahoma / Tennessee. Definitely not cannabis friendly places, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have opportunities to engage with or work with companies, especially in this like new-ish virtual world we're in. But just know and be really transparent with whoever you're working with about like if you're looking to intern, like what's your age? It's a 21+ industry, so making sure you're really clear about that. Also what you like can and can't do. Plant touching, usually there's very little opportunity for plant touching outside of those more mature markets. So just being really transparent about that, and looking into like how to not work around the system, but figure out ways to work through some of the obstacles.
And remember everyone that we're referring to like legal regulated with either a medical or an adult use regulatory framework for access. And hemp, there is, we did a great module on hemp a couple modules ago for anyone that wasn't able to catch that, with a couple of great speakers. But we get down into the legality a bit about hemp and the market in all 50 states. And I guess ultimately is to understand your local and state regulations when it comes to whether it's hemp to adult use, if you have access there, because that absolutely plays into the time and resources that companies or social organizations are going to be investing into as part of their marketing or brand strategy, including a plan. So, and also like not being able to appeal under the age of 21 is like a pretty standard thing. Like in Massachusetts is a regulation around nothing childlike. So nothing appealing to the children, all sorts of compliance stuff, compliance. And if I haven't mentioned compliance, but even down to your logos, your packaging, warning labels, advertising on billboards or radio ads or wherever, there can be some pretty complex regulations around that. And never mind on social media, like Muna mentioned, but there are so many instances where cannabis accounts are being shut down. So as a strategy, it's becoming more normal that you have backups of backups accounts, and you also simultaneously are building that up, not to lose your community that you're building on these platforms. So, and I'm always a big proponent to driving traffic back to your brand or organization's website, having all your content be owned and lived through your web platform, not through social, because all that can be shut down at any point and shared in whatever way. So you have a bit of a home for where your brand lives. So, and you're right, just a comment, Ashley saying Massachusetts is heavily regulated. It is important to know the regulations for the state which you serve. So truth.
I do want to add one more thing to that point, is that make sure you know what the regulations are. Also, they change frequently, and things like my very first cannabis like work experience was when I was an intern and I was living in Nashville, and we had a CBD hemp like beauty brand, and I got to write the founder bios and the brand bio and draft those. But then again, like 3 months after I had written those, like you being able to say hemp when you're advertising product in Tennessee, like the regulations around that changed, or what was able to be on the shelf advertised for certain things changes. So even if you're not, like I said, in a super mature market or one where like THC is available, there's plenty of opportunities to get some experience or to be in the industry, but they can drop or they can change at a drop of a hat. So definitely make sure you're always staying tuned to that.
Well said. Jill, what do you want?
I was going to say, I agree with what you're saying, because when I used to write, when I did some beauty writing back in the day, it's like 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I was doing some writing about some cannabis beauty products. I wanted to pitch them to a well-known outlet who I will not name, but it was just like, you would think I pitched them cocaine, it was like, what are you talking about? Now, fast forward, here we are 5 years later, there's cannabis in everything. There's so many beauty products out there and they're talking about it. So it just goes to show that, like you said, where you are now, a year from now, the situations are changing. And I would definitely think that if you're a brand or a marketer, publicist, you're an entrepreneur in this industry, the most important thing that you need to do is continuously do your research on laws, because like you were saying, you cannot stress, like every state's different and they're literally changing like every week. It seems like there's a new regulation, there's new legislation being introduced, and that's so important to keep on top of. And I would also say to make sure that if you are in an area that you have access to your politicians, your councilman, your senator, whoever, make sure you're able to get in touch with them so that you can, maybe push things along and get your brand together to like help, maybe, I don't know, help this person with their campaign so they know, hey, this industry supports you. And I think that's important to let them know that the industry supports the politicians so that maybe they'll support us as well. And because it's a two-way street no matter how we work it. But yeah, and know your audience, know your audience, just like any other product or brand. It's marketing 101, like transferable. Know your brand, know your audience, know who you're marketing to. And like any other, that blueprint is still there, even in the cannabis market. It's just going to flip a little, but the blueprint is still there. You still have to know your audience, do your research. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. And be original with however you decide to market, but definitely know where you can and cannot promote your products. That's so important, because and as a publicist, if anyone wants to get into that industry as a PR person, there are different publications popping up all the time. So you have to do your research, know who your influencers are in that market, in the space, go to the conventions, and just make sure that you're seen and hopefully heard as well. I don't really have any don'ts, but the don'ts, I would say, it's definitely like you were saying, just don't market where you know that you can't, and just make sure you know where you can market your products, how you can market them, what words you can use, which is so important, the vocabulary. I think Anne, you and I had that conversation, whether to use CBD or hemp, it can be that pivotal in your marketing materials. And if you have someone that's working on your website, make sure that they are aware of the compliance, the verbiage that they can use as well. Because that, you can get your website shut down for something that you didn't research. So.
Oh yeah, and like digital marketing with cannabis, like on Google or something, it's not happening. It's so you really, as far as like digital marketing and the words that you're using for SEO or SEM also comes into play. And SEO is search engine optimization, and it's for those who are listening, it's a method or a tactic to help link up the Google algorithm to find your website or have it be on more of a top of a list in the research. And I feel like Ashley, our beloved Ashley, would in our mind would be able to share information on that back end. But I'm married to a tech man. I'm not the tech woman. So I also would like to just add that we take a consideration for folks who are listening and transferring skills, and a little bit of a would, like, in addition to doing your research, this plant has a long history. It has a complex history of its migration through the world and into the States, especially how it's affected communities who have been most impacted by the war on drugs And also at the same time, you're connecting with a broad demographic of all walks of life. So that would be a recommendation in a do is to understand a bit of the history of the plant and the history within the people and the community here in the States. So I wanted just to plant that seed here. And Ashley has a good question.
Reach out to those, even reach out to those communities. If you're a brand, you know, reach out to those communities and make the connections.
True. Great suggestion. Ashley has a little son. She said, do you work closely with establishments compliance on the do's and don'ts, the compliance department?
And for all of us, for both of us.
If anyone's worked, if you have worked with an operator in the regulated market, medical and or adult use operators, have you both ever experienced working closely with compliance departments?
I have
not from a marketing standpoint.
I have not, but I am working with someone in politics now who is introducing legislation for legalization. And so I expect to know more about that. It's all new, but I expect to know more about that very, very soon.
There are compliance things, so I'm just going to use Massachusetts as another example of having to work closely as a brand and growth dev agency, a joint venture and co. When they're coming up with, say, a billboard campaign, there are certain information you have to prove that 85% of the viewers that are looking at that piece of advertisement is over the age of 21. And then there's different regs around it being on radio and even what you post on social media and like this like blurb around FDA. There are some things like larger campaigns, you do end up working closely with a compliance officer or director of compliance. Yeah. And then Danielle has a good suggestion here for cannabis. She thinks in terms of compliance guide to supplement the style guide. Yes. Like a brand style guide in a sense. This is what we can say, this is what we can't say. This is our tone of voice. This is our personality, our style. And Danielle, let me know if that's a thumbs up of the direction that you were going there, but it's complex. So if you know how to read, good. And know how to read and take that information in, it'll be very valuable for anyone who's interested in bringing their skill sets in marketing and brand, because you really, the details of it all. So.
And while we're on talking about the transferable skills, so take a compliance guide with your brand guide. When we say transferable, it doesn't necessarily have to be like, well, I marketed this and I did this way. I think one sector that is actually really transferable to cannabis is if you work in any sort of food or consumer goods that have claims. So a lot of this idea of compliance, I got a lot of my experience from that, working with a brand that they were like a wellness brand. Like they served like functional beverages. So this idea, like you can't go on Instagram and say that drinking our drink will like help your immune system. You like that legally you can't say that. The FDA won't allow you to say that. So even for that brand, we had developed kind of like what you can say on which platform and what is like suggested or what is implied versus what is explicitly stated. So there's a lot of ways, a lot of industries beyond cannabis that have compliance restrictions, or there's different ways you have to think about like what you say and where you say it. So there's a lot of transferable experiences that you actually may have without even realizing it for cannabis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you really have to be creative, compliant, but creative at the same time, and how to connect with the audience that you're looking to hear your message or see your piece of advertising. So I love that. And Jill, did you want to add something?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Well, speaking about transferable skills, Muna, and like bringing that into our next question is focusing a bit on the career path. There's a lot of job opportunities in marketing and brand, and many of them are very applicable to cannabis and hemp. I'd like to highlight a bit of entry-level positions, and if y'all would share a little bit about, I know we talked a bit about how you started in this space, but a little bit like the actual titles, like an entry-level position, like a coordinator or specialist or on a project or event assistant, communications person. Like, what was one of your first roles, Muna? You was working on a project, you said, right?
Yeah, that was actually when I was just a communications intern. I was at a communications and creative consultancy, and they operated in the fashion and beauty space. And one of their clients was a beauty brand that used CBD. But some of the job titles or job opportunities. So typically, like standard in marketing, from like the agency perspective, like, and that of course overlaps into cannabis is starting out as like an account coordinator. So those are usually the entry-level role where you have the opportunity to kind of listen and learn, sit in on meetings, coordinate between teams and between your employer, your agency with your clients. Then there are account managers. So you usually are directly in touch with your clients, so the cannabis brand. If you're at like a cannabis marketing agency, and you talk with them directly on weekly, bi-weekly basis about what they're doing for their business, what their goals are, what they're trying to reach, who they're trying to reach from a marketing perspective, and trying to come up with strategies or campaigns to meet those goals. Then there's an account director who oversees usually multiple clients or multiple accounts, and thinks really high level, long-term strategy about meeting marketing goals. So those are, I would say, entry to mid-level. And even, the last agency I was at, when I stepped away, I was at the associate director level. And that was really cross-functional of when we were doing influencer marketing. We were, there was like strategic partnerships, there was some social media in there, and really just getting an opportunity to look at the big picture and figuring out like what ways, if you're looking to go into a new market or to target a new customer, kind of thinking big picture about how to put that in play.
So true. I'm happy you mentioned partnerships, because it's a bit, as you get more into mid management roles or associate director roles, the overall like relationship building and partnerships is what really ends up feeding the business of the sort of clients you want to be working with, especially. So, and then Jill, your experience with being in the space that you've been in for a while and being more at this executive level, or like what a VP or a CMO or a chief brand officer would look like. So, tell us a little bit about what's brought you to that exec level and the sort of opportunities.
It's so funny to hear you say that. I don't consider myself, I'm like, I don't look at myself like that, but okay. But yeah, I mean, yes, but it's weird to hear it from somebody else, you know? So yeah, my first intro into the business was more of a consulting on a project where I worked in, it was a technology space. I worked on an app within the cannabis industry. So, you know, having any technology experience is definitely a good way to shift into this business as well, because there is a lot of there are some tech spaces for it now. So I worked on actually I wouldn't say the launch of the technology app, but it was more of the outreach, media outreach for the CEO, getting her name out there, just getting the awareness of the brand out there. So there's media strategists in this industry. There are director of communications, same, very similar, just overseeing all of the communications, outreach and strategies and methods. So those are roles that are definitely available in the space, as well as, hold on a second, there were some notes here I wrote, like business development, you have those people. There's always going to be a need for business development, aka sales. So, and that, a lot of that comes through just networking and being in the business. One client likes you, so they'll refer you to someone else, and it just kind of snowballs that way.
Mm.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So, and like even with what you and I had worked on previously, and then we have the the charitable event. So that was something that was kind of organically happened. So it wasn't really a project, and it helped to propel into other things. So I think it just all depends on what you're doing. It helps you move into the next section or the next area of cannabis and where you'd like to be. I, recently wound up being in something more political, which I did not expect at all. So now it's about what political experience have you had? Maybe none, but you're coming from a space where this, this legalization is important, and you have that experience from the marketing aspect of it, of cannabis. So why not apply that here? It's very similar, and you're doing the research. You're still doing peer research. You're still doing management, media strategy, and outreach. So all of those positions are available in that space as well.
I'm happy you said, because the positions in the space is pretty like large, and then there's such a broad, inclusive roles that help contribute to the machine of what it takes to market and brand hemp and cannabis, and do it well, that's like true to the brand or true to the social initiative, and do so that it's pretty classic and real. And I just want to share some keywords and positions that you might hear. Both Muna and Jill has shared several, including everything from biz dev, brand strategy, marketing, advertising, communications, which is super important, content production, video, designers, graphics, and blogging is a really big thing. Yeah, writing is so huge. And also podcasts, like any sort of like, there's all different types of like earned media, paid media. So, and then obviously PR. I mean, it's just a lot. So you have your entry, your mid, and your executive level roles here. And something you might hear is chief marketing officer or chief brand officer, as far as like the overarching person that, like Muna said, has more long-term thinking and strategically responsible for a lot of resource planning and time management. And because building and marketing a brand is a long-term play for anyone that's going to come and be like, oh, don't worry about it, like in 6 months we're going to like, rule the market. It's like, okay, cool. That might not be like for me, because I know like when it comes to building a brand, it's a long-term play here. And that takes time. And someone at this executive level is kind of the vision keeper and ensuring that we're staying the course of fulfilling the mission of the vision. And it takes time. It just does, if you're going to do it right. So I encourage you all to hold that and see if it resonates with you. But those who are intentionally doing that from the get-go is not a bad place to kind of start learning more about what they do and where your place in that organization or that initiative is. So my little 2 cents there. I just wanted to share, Ashley has a good question. Do you see more jobs within the cannabis establishments or operators, or with firms that support cannabis industry, or for freelance marketers?
Great question.
I saw that in the chat. It's a really good question, and I haven't thought about that before. But so I'm thinking about like positions or jobs. There's two axes, I guess, to think about. One is internal, like the agency side, or the in-house side. So agency is like when you're working at a marketing agency or a branding agency or business consultancy, that usually hires operators as clients. And the in-house team is that you are the account coordinator, or sorry, the coordinator or manager for the actual operator themselves. Like you are with, like you work for the cannabis company directly. So thinking about that. And then the second axis to think about is plant touching versus like ancillary or not plant touching. So as you can imagine, plant touching has much more compliance, much more, there's much more regulation. So just in that sense, because firms and agencies are typically, like, they're just not plant touching by definition, there's a little bit more flexibility, which allows for a lot of creativity, and it also allows to bring like experiences from other brands or other clients to a potential client. So in that sense, I think that like for actually like finite jobs, I would say, I can't speak exactly to like the share of jobs in-house versus agency side, but it is really standard, like in marketing in general, for most in-house teams to hire at a certain level to hire an agency. And agencies do like turnover is higher, or there's more job opportunities in agencies overall, just because of the way they function, and because there's just so much more variety, because you're working with multiple operators or multiple clients than if you were just working on one company, one brand for many years. So hopefully that kind of sets like a foundational understanding of thinking about where the opportunities could lie.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree.
I would say more jobs. I would say from what I'm seeing, there are definitely opportunities within, I'm seeing more firms getting into that industry now and taking on those clients that are in this space. I would definitely say there's more of that than ever before. And I'm also seeing more agencies that are strictly working in that space pop up. So I think that there are going to be a lot more agencies that are focused on the cannabis industry specifically. So there will be more jobs in that space for marketing and PR. But as far as the plant side, that I can't really speak to because I don't really deal with that side in general, but I'm sure there are opportunities popping up all the time based on the states you live in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, or the Virgin Islands.
Yes.
Right.
We'll see. Their plan is, since 2018, they've been, okayed for medicinal purposes, but their plan has yet to roll out.
Yeah.
So.
And to Jill's point, so when you're thinking about like opportunities of marketing or marketing agencies for cannabis, there are agencies that like strictly focus on cannabis, but there are also like tons of work. Essentially any marketing agency can take on cannabis clients. I mean, not in a literal sense that they may be equipped for it, but the opportunity to expand in that space. So in that sense that there's the market or the potential for growth and expansion is much larger. So in that sense, like I was saying, where I've worked almost every marketing agency or consultancy I've worked for veered into the cannabis space or had a cannabis related client, but none of them would have considered themselves a cannabis marketing firm. So in that sense, that there's a lot of opportunity to work in or around cannabis without being strictly like a cannabis marketer. So I think that there's a lot more job opportunities just for that fact that you don't have to be exclusive to cannabis.
Which brings it back to, mainstream moving into the cannabis industry. Like they're waking up into that and saying, hey, this is $140 billion industry, something like that, or $40 billion industry. And they want a piece of that. So why not? It makes sense.
Yeah, I hope it's it makes sense both from a a profit, but also a purpose. And for those who are
Yeah.
really looking to get into it, because you will do
I said that because, you know, the people that we're talking about, they're not looking at the plan, they're looking at the profit. So they're like, oh, well, let's, you know, the ones that are the agencies that are specifically for the plant, we know what they're about.
yes. And I hope that everyone's watching this helps you kind of feel out that navigating which firm is about it and those who are not. And I just want to share, there's a question here from Casey. It says, aside from working in marketing and branding in the medical market for 4 years, I have a background in qualitative consumer market research. Are there roles around that in the adult use industry? And I'm like, yeah, there's market
Simple
research.
answer is yes.
Research is
research.
so important. That's, you know, we live on research. So yeah.
In fact, that would be so incredibly valuable because I was just reading this past week that like I guess the data or the research was done and that what the expectations were around branding were different. So of course, like the cannabis is a newer industry, and with some of the first to market brands and companies, there was this assumption that it would be super brand identity focused. Like when you think of some of the early cannabis brands, like, or even some of the ones who are starting to get bigger, like really sexy, cool looking products and really fancy like typefaces and all of this different stuff. And these brands were pouring a lot of money into like branding and marketing for this like perception or for this this chic or coolness. And they did some quantitative market research as well, and it found out that a lot of consumers are price driven. And they're like they are not brand loyal, that they are looking for like the best product for the best price. So in that sense, that you still need a market, like marketing is still important, branding is still important for every single one of those brands, but the idea of like how that entirely shifts what your marketing strategy is or what your branding goals are. So that information, that experience is so valuable. And even in this very moment, like the cannabis industry at large is really reevaluating their, like what they're expecting from consumers because of consumer market research.
Yep.
And I'll say some, just from my experience, I've gone pretty creative through joint venture Coda to some great real-time market research. So there are qualitative, like actual, like sit down and review and have discussion around product for legit market research. But then there's like creative market research as far as gathering a group of 30 people at a yoga retreat and having one line, a product line there, only focused on that, getting great feedback from them on, and also learning from them of how they're coming to a decision on which formula that they're choosing or how much they consumed and whether they were like, I don't know if I felt it, what was I going for? Like that whole journey of this self-exploration of building their own relationship with the plant is fascinating. So market research can be done as it's always done formally, as well as through data and logistics and analytics, but then also real time, which is my preferred method of real talk, relevant market research, and find it very, very valuable for feedback. So I just want to plant that seed. Thank you for asking that, Casey. And cool, we're feeling good, ladies. We're gonna, what was that, Jill?
I see, that is a really great question because it's more, the research is really important. People pay great money for good research. So
They make the decisions from like packaging to again where they're putting their time and resources into it. So and then Casey also said, thank you for these answers. I notice a variance in my patients and there's only so much I can do under compliance rules but my research brain is yearning to dive more into their minds as cannabis consumers. Yeah. And also for cannabis consumers, there's some great research at point of sale when you're in a location, and the recommendations that the individual behind the counter has in the consumer or the patient's influence in the decision that they're making when it comes to purchasing their products. So there's a lot to link up as far as market research, and outside of like a controlled study group and like Real Talk at point of sale, or different folks who are a part of this whole machine of getting the product to the people, or the service, or the social initiative. Because I find like it's product, service, and social initiatives that all have brand and marketing built around them. So, and thank you, Danielle. She's going to add some thoughts about jobs, but at the end. Speaking about jobs, let's talk about some qualifications and desired skills that when you're coming across like Jill, and you're like, oh yeah, I can help play a role in legalizing, you know, access to the plant for anyone over the age of 21 for the U.S. Virgin Islands. Like, yes, like, can we share a little bit from those desired skills or qualifications, and even some of the keywords that you used, or any sort of particular description that you were like, okay, yes, this, I'm going to get this. Like, I need this. I'm going to use it during my interview, on my resume, on my cover letter.
Okay, skills, qualifications. It's very interesting because I think all the qualifications that I had already from everything I've done kind of led here. So it wasn't something that I said, well, do I have the qualifications for it? Because the job opportunity, or what was needed for that opportunity with the Virgin Islands was so, to me, it was like, oh, well, of course, you know, it was a lot of writing, a lot of things I'd done already. Like, thank God I've had editorial writing experience. I've had PR writing experience, business writing experience. So to come to now political writing experience, it was really a no-brainer because I already had the skills. I've already done so much research before writing anything that researching whatever I needed here wasn't really difficult. So I would say that you have to, as you know, as we spoke about in the beginning, be aware of your capabilities and what you can do. And a really amazing headhunter told me this, a little secret. He had mentioned to me that whenever you get a job description, make sure that your resume is always using the keywords in the job description. Make sure to tailor your resume to that job description. And there's actually a survey that says that most men, when they go out for a job, they're not qualified for it, but they know that they can do it. Women, we go and we're like, we have to have every single qualification before we go and apply for the job. Why do we do that? Why aren't we like men and say, well, we know we can do it? Because if we can do all of these other things that we've been doing, if there's one thing on that job that you haven't done, it doesn't mean that you are not qualified for the job. You just have to learn that skill. Be willing to learn it. That's really what I would say. The main qualification is to have a willingness to learn and be teachable in this industry because it's so new. And I would also say for marketing and branding, really make sure that you have the experience of marketing a brand that's marketing an underdog, because it's an uphill battle in cannabis. And if you don't have the experience of marketing an underdog or promoting an underdog product or person, you're gonna have a really tough time here because it's an uphill battle. Like, everything you do is an uphill battle. You're fighting for press, you're fighting for legalization, you're fighting for just to be able to have your ad placed, you're fighting for a bank account. So, you know, you have to have thick skin. That's what I would say.
You stole my answer about being or being willing to learn. Because essentially, as Jill was saying, that when you look at a job description on a website or on LinkedIn or something like that, usually it lists like what you're going to be doing in the role, and 90% of what's listed is teachable. Like, you may not know how to create this kind of report, but you can be taught that. You may not know how to like build a certain kind of campaign, but those are all teachable. So it's important to be willing to learn, be open to learn, be really tapped in. I think that for marketing in general, being tapped into what's happening in society, in culture, in the industry, like kind of knowing like what's new and what's interesting is really important, but specifically for the cannabis industry. And I say this because like there's a large history around tokenism or stereotyping. So being tapped into culture, into society, into like what's actually like, how are people talking about things? How are people doing things? How are people engaging with cannabis authentically? I think that that's really important for, and even if a brand doesn't know it or won't say it, it's important. I think it's important that anyone who's looking to be in the marketing and branding space in cannabis is willing and actively tapping into culture and being really aware. And that just may mean like following the right influencers on Instagram, subscribing to some like of the right newsletters, making sure you're checking in on certain websites and things like that, but really make sure that you like aren't living in a vacuum. If you're going to be marketing to the world, then you need to be tapped into the world. So that's an important qualification, the 21 plus world. But that's, I think it's an important qualification that I think is like by far and away going to make anyone stand out.
That's a gem drop right there. Love it. So would we say like the communications, being organized, this cross-functional teamwork, creative thinking and problem solving, all are also great fundamental qualifications for someone who's going to be adding their skill set to this field of marketing and brand in general, but especially in cannabis. So great point.
Yeah, and also, I mean, us being women of color entering this business and in this industry, I mean, we see, to your point about tokenism, I think that there's a lot of people in this industry who don't look like us, but want to market to us, but don't want our voices in the room. And we have to be very conscious of that as well, because we need to be in those rooms to make sure that the wording is correct, that we're seen, and we are also getting, I mean, you're diversity and equity, so you know what I'm talking about.
The number of Instagram accounts I've seen where 30% of like at least one every week, every day, whatever it is, that they have a person of color like in their advertisement, but then if you go to their team and there's nary melanin, you see nothing of yourself in them. It's so frustrating and it's so disheartening sometimes, because you're like, well, why does this, like, and I can tell, I'm like, this ad doesn't feel quite right. Like, I'm not, this product looks like it could be good, but I'm not vibing with it. And almost always I can check their Instagram and see, well, all of these photos look beautiful and they have people that look like me. But when you go to their team, you can tell that they didn't know necessarily how to speak to someone like me. So, so yeah, definitely. I think that there's.
And that could be, and that could be an opportunity for us to say, hey, knock, knock. Maybe you need someone on your team that, they consult with someone like me or someone like you to get the wording correctly and to find the people that they really need to speak to. So, I mean, that could be another avenue of opportunity there too. If you're really smart and you see that, like you said, hey, I went on and saw your team. There's nobody that looks like me on your team. You need me. Let's have a meeting.
Yeah, or even something that actually where the first consultancy that I interned at, the managing director said that I actually love when younger folks come in and interview and kind of tell us what we're doing wrong, because at the end of the day, like, these companies want to make money, they want to sell products, they want to gain market share. So if you go into an interview and say, like I saw your ads and they were cool, but they didn't really resonate with someone like me. I can help you do better. Like, why would they not want more customers, want more market share, want more sales? So really, you can go in and sell yourself by like identifying those opportunities for them to veer away from tokenism and really authentically speak to consumers that are people of color, are women of color, or just aren't represented in their team.
I'm so happy you brought that up, because having that insight and that perspective and that contribution in the conversation needs to be at the table, eating dinner together, like not just at a time of need or something that's culturally happening, but or within society, but on the reg, as a norm, no matter what the heck, like, is time, peoples. And I feel like we're kind of already getting into our next slide here, pros of entering the space, and especially for people of color and women, that you're already like, hey, I'm already coming in with, where is our voice in this conversation, or within this organization or this social initiative? Like, how can we work together, and how can this be represented? So I'm so happy we started chatting about that, and to encourage BIPOC community and women of color to have that confidence to come in and be like, no, I know, I seen this, I know where I come from, I know the sort of conversations I'm having within my family and my community, and y'all could use a little like finger on the pulse of like what's really happening.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure you've had, I'm sure you have stories.
Yeah.
So many conversations where you're like, really, is this what we're doing here? You know?
Well, and there's some that I'm thinking of, like pros of entering marketing and brand and cannabis, is that there's also what I think is most exciting about it is that if you do care about equity, if you do care about impact, and I say that not to mean that there are people like that you wouldn't, but if that's something that you're passionate about, cannabis is an industry that is ripe for opportunities to do better. It's like I can't speak for all brands or all companies, but people are willing to do better. That even if there may be some resistance, there is a lot of opportunity that you can push back, or you can really have your voice heard. I think there may be a little bit where we talk about like when it's not being heard, or it's a little bit hostile, how to step away from that or handle that. But I think that there's so many people who are like willing to like open their ears to what is being said. And if there are opportunities, essentially, like I got to a point where I would speak up, or I would say certain things. And if the person I'm speaking up to is upset about it or doesn't value it, then that's not the right place for me anyway. So even in an interview process, it can be kind of scary to say that. But if you're in an interview and they don't go back to their team and say, someone said this, and I think this is important that we target these customers, or make sure we're being inclusive, or make sure we're doing all of those things that you brought up, that if you think that's going to hurt your chances of getting the job, just consider if you want to be working for a place that doesn't even want to acknowledge or talk about what it means to be better marketers in the industry.
And yeah, to your point, that's so true, because I've had companies where I've talked to them, and I've had one interviewer actually say to me, we're a very white company. And I was like, you know, like, okay, so you're talking to me because you want to add your one token person here? And, you know, I just thought that was so bizarre. I'm like, why are you telling me this? I've seen it on your, you know, on your website, but it was just like for her to say it, and basically just telling me we're just trying to, you know, do some diversity interviews. And that's another thing to be careful of, because people will say, yeah, we want to add more diversity to our team, but they can hire you and then fire you 6 months later and still say that they had a diverse team. It's just to make their numbers look good. And that's another thing that's going on. People are getting hired and getting fired just to up the numbers. Yeah. So just to up their diversity and inclusion numbers. And I was made aware of that through someone that I was surprised that the company is doing this. I cannot say the company's name, but it's a big one, and I'm really surprised that they're doing that. So it's definitely something to look out for. Not a cannabis company, but just companies across the board.
They can have it in the cannabis company too. Trust and believe. There are things like in Massachusetts as a regulator, and for everyone listening, I'm based in Mass, so I'm very familiar with Mass regs, but there is even something like a positive impact plan that you have to have and actually execute on every year, as well as a diversity and inclusion plan. So to be compliant, to be able to renew their license. So even by that, they're trying to, from a regulatory standpoint, have that be a part of the process. But
But then I wonder, okay, from the quote unquote legacy market, I think that it's not just what I think, but from my perspective, it would seem as though the legacy market should be really, number one in this market right now. Because you have people that were making a lot of money in this industry, did not go to jail or anything, and they're doing okay. Those people should be at the top of this game because they're very smart. They know how to do the game. They know how to operate within the illegal space. Imagine what they can do in the legal space. So that's what it's so important to really look at that. And, the people that are in that market need to have that opportunity and need to know that they'll be safe as well. And that's the legalization. I feel like there's everything being done to make sure that this is going to take a long time for people to really be able to realize the kind of opportunities that they could have coming from the legacy market to the legal market. And it just doesn't make sense. It's like, why do we have that situation in Illinois? Why, I'm glad to see New York has a program. We just saw their rollout. Their discussion of the rollout. They want to have an equity plan for licenses where if you are an equity license holder, you can only sell your license to another equity applicant. And I think that's really important. Other states, might want to adopt that because it keeps it in a certain circle. Because we're seeing so much big business buy up all the licenses, and then the little guy is just left out in the cold. Or you have their stipulations for you to get a license. Why are there so many stipulations?
No, I was going to say there's a lot of transferable skills from the legacy market, which I know we've talked a lot about transferable skills all along this conversation, and I hope everyone who's been listening and connecting you're like, oh my God, yes, that is a transferable skill. And I, even coming from the legacy market, whether you've been cultivating it on your windowsill to experimenting with product development and making your own topical products or edible products or teas or honeys, to supply chain logistics, to retail and at point of sale. I mean, there is a lot that you can transfer into this space by being in the legacy market. And naturally, marketing and branding is very transferable from that space because you really have to listen to your consumer base. The volume and the data of the sales is going to dictate and inform you as an owner operator, or whichever, that you are making sure that community feels seen and heard and that they're getting what they want. So what was that, Jill?
Most importantly, the customer is getting what they want.
And I feel like everyone with transferable skills, I think we have talked about it just from what is applicable from your current roles or current set of experience, and being able to translate that into this field. It's quite easy. It's not over. Everyone has something to contribute to this field, especially in marketing and branding. There's a lot of communication, a lot of communication goes on in this as a marketing and brand role, and being consistent about that and sincere and honest about your style of communication and all your methods and tactics and all that really does matter. So you have a transferable skill for sure if you're not only reading it, but also like reading it from not just the job description, but like kind of taking it in. Muna, you had mentioned going on their IG, going to their website, like doing a little bit of kind of, are they a company of integrity? Do they actually walk the walk that they're talking the talk? Which is a wonderful transferable skill for you as well in marketing and branding, because that really gives you an insight of the story that you're looking to either create and or share of your client anyways. So I feel pretty good. Does anyone want to add to any kind of fundamentals of transferable skills and knowing for sure if you have it and applying it into this field?
All I'll say is that marketing is speaking to your consumer. And if you are a cannabis consumer, then you already have like you already have insights to bring. So and this is, and I'm saying this as I entered the cannabis space, not being a cannabis consumer. So like if you're not a consumer, a cannabis consumer, that's totally fine of being in the industry. But if you are, that's a transferable, you have transferable skills. And how do you talk about it with your friends? Like, or even like, have you asked questions about it? Like, those are transferable skills. If you are communicating and sharing information and recommending products to your friends, even things like that can be seen as transferable skills that you talk about during your interview, or even in your cover letter. Because truthfully, like, who can really sit down and expect, especially for an entry-level role, for you to have 10 years experience, or for you to have the exact experience they need for that role? So you can be really creative about what you've done in the past in and around cannabis as a consumer, and use that in positions as skill sets, or developing a way to talk about cannabis socially, or even how you yourself have selected products, and how, like, thinking about that and how that informs what you would do if you were the person marketing those things.
Awesome. Gems, just all gems. I love it. It's such really applicable, real talk here. So this is, I hope everyone's really vibing with this both now and later, and resonating with this and positioning you for success, most importantly. Let's talk a little bit about some keywords when folks are applying for jobs. And I feel like we've hit quite a bit. And when we know, when it comes to marketing and brand, there are, depending on the role or the project or the contract, different keywords will be applicable when you're submitting it to your as a part of your resume and cover letter, and your interview process as well. But doing so in a way that, like, you know it to be true for you, and applying that experience. But also, like we had spoken earlier, don't be afraid, like, you're a quick study, like, you're like, this sounds a lot similar to what we did here, and I know we could execute it here. But yeah, if y'all, I know I've shared some keywords, but I don't know if y'all want to share a little bit.
I haven't really had to interview for a job per se in the field, directly for cannabis. It's more of a position, but it just happened to include a cannabis initiative. So I can't really speak to that, but I would say that whatever your skill set is, once again, if it's applicable to what you're doing now, it's applicable to the cannabis industry, because it needs all of these roles, the PR communications director, the marketing person, the brand strategy person, the content creator, those are all positions that are available in this industry. So, and making sure you have keywords such as content strategy, media strategy, communications, I'm speaking from the PR perspective, but branding strategies, partnership opportunities. There are lots of, anything that you would do in PR, you can transfer it there. So those keywords are very similar, but you may have to find, keywords that are specific to cannabis, such as, your cannabis content branding or whatever you were doing, hemp or CBD, utilize those words because that's important.
So in terms of your resume, and I know I keep using the word transferable skills, but I'm going to separate two different transferable skills in two different ways because the the advice, the keywords will be different. So if you're in marketing and branding already and you're transferring into the cannabis industry, I'm fairly confident that there's little that you have to change in the sense that for these roles, they're looking more so for marketing and branding experience than cannabis experience. So really just emphasizing the work that you've done, especially if it's been in a regulatory market like wellness tends to be, or anything that is geo-specific. So if you work at a company that only can operate, if they have their physical stores, so if they're physical stores that are only in Texas, that in and of itself is geo-locked. So being able to speak to having very geographically defined marketing campaigns or things like that, those maybe will, speaking to those a bit more will help as you transition into cannabis, but by and large, it's fairly the same because they're looking more for marketing and branding experience than cannabis, general cannabis experience. For someone who is transitioning either from somewhere else in cannabis into the marketing and branding side of cannabis, or from outside of cannabis and marketing into cannabis branding and marketing, I would recommend just switching the words that you have in your resume currently to be in marketing speak. So there's probably things that you've done that could speak to the skills that you can bring for marketing. So if you've worked on on a project basis in your role, if you can think about those campaigns or ways that you created a plan, developed it with the team, and then executed it, and talking about it as a campaign versus maybe a project, if that would make sense for that. Discussing that, or even when discussing KPIs, if you have KPIs in your resume, positioning those as results, a key result, or engagement, or impact. So engagement is a huge thing for marketing. So if you, especially if you're working in the social space, so if you can highlight ways that you've gotten customers or team members or people to be engaged, that will be really valuable to talk about that. I'm trying to think of a couple of others. I had a few in mind. But in thinking, just essentially, not that resume should be super jargon heavy, but the idea of being able to speak to the work that you'll already be doing, because those words will be thrown around once you start the job. If you're from somewhere else within cannabis, transferring into the marketing and branding side of cannabis, speaking to whether it was plant touching versus not, I think that there's something that can be said about that. Because if you've had experience, I think it's valuable for they're transferable and cross-functional, but I think that may be something that's interesting, because even if you're working, if you're applying for a job that is plant touching and everyone on their team has experience plant touching, but you have experience and an ancillary you're not plant touching or hemp or CBD side, that might be valuable because it's a different perspective. So really talking about if you have specific experience in cannabis, what that is, and using the industry specific language to describe that.
True. And I just want to add to that, just also listing any sort of memberships both in and out of cannabis and or hemp, as well as any certifications on your resume. And then just in a nutshell, your keywords, make sure that they're not words that you're not used to using, or you don't really understand what the words mean if you're going to be using them on your resume, because it will come up during your interview. So you want to really resonate and understand what that terminology means, and be able to speak from a place of understanding and awareness around that. So good points. And
Just want to add something. Another thing that I didn't mention before about, the media and marketing part of it is definitely make sure you have results of campaigns, the best outcomes that you've had on your resume, types of publications you've worked with. Even if they aren't in the cannabis industry, it shows like your level of your skill set, whether you've worked with top tier or mid-tier, local, national. Those are things that an employer would want to know.
That's so true. And I think a lot of folks seeing it gives them like a better understanding that you're not just siloed into like the cannabis and hemp world, that you are, welcoming of an audience that could be touching this whole community. So love that. So I think ultimately it's really us to know ourselves and to know our prospective employer. Like we should really know that, so it feels real. And also for BIPOC community and women of color to kind of know what you're getting into, and doing the work and looking at who is a part of the team, who have they worked with, what sort of initiatives have they really worked on, or are they a part of, and making that decision for yourself, because you will want to do the best at building that brand or marketing it when you feel truly connected with it. So I hope I don't know if y'all have anything to add to that.
Actually, I have one thing, just one thing about the rooms. We talked about being BIPOC and being a woman of color in the industry. I don't know about you, Muna, but I've always been, in places where I'm the only or one of the only. So I'm kind of used to it, but I have to say a lot of people are uncomfortable with that, and you should embrace it, because you are representing, that voice in the room, and you have to be there. So if you are the only one in that room, embrace it.
Yeah, I was and I was gonna actually talk more to that later in the presentation, but I guess to add some more more thoughts to that is full circle of like knowing thyself is like, know what matters to you and what's important to you. And I don't think that there's any, apart from like some companies that are just truly awful, I don't think that there's any environment that can be objectively wrong for all people. The idea that like people of color, women of color, are monolithic. So what makes sense for you when you actually feel like you can thrive and excel may not be the same for others. So when thinking about like knowing yourself and knowing your prospective employer, and especially from an equity and inclusion standpoint, that can mean different things for different people. Don't think about what is right or wrong for that company, but more so what is right or wrong for you. Like, what do you expect from your employer? What would allow you to thrive? Where do you feel like you can make change if you want to make change? And if you don't want to make change, then then go to a place where you feel like you don't have to make any change. You don't have to advocate for anything, and that you can come into a space that already is aligned.
Thank you, Muna. And I guess a good start for that would be on your cover letter too, to be like, hey, I'm really resonating, or I'm in alignment with, this particular program, or this particular leadership, or this particular project that you did. And that could be really catching those who are looking at your resume and your cover letters when you're speaking in a way that has already spoken to you, and conveying that into your cover letter for them to want to then read your resume. So Yeah, I mean, don't have to go like actual bullet point of all your keywords on your cover letter by no means, but for sure connecting personally in a way as well as professionally on your cover letter to hopefully resonate with the task at hand. Because let's keep it real, whether you're ancillary or plant touching, it's busy, it's rapid, and the clearer you can make a connection and with that contact that's looking at your resume and your cover letter, like the rate of you being able to have an opportunity to get an interview hopefully is that much better. So I don't know if anyone wants to jam out here. We have our resident program contributor here, Ms. Danielle. She wanted to contribute anything, but
Can I say just one quick thing about cover letters? Something that's coming to mind, especially with what's been discussed today, is that a cover letter is an investment. It takes time, and cover letters are really important, especially for marketing and branding. But do you really want to work for this company? And the research that you would do on the company is what will inform the cover letter. So I just want to say one specific thing about that. That I've been dealing with a lot over the last few years in staffing is when I'm going to be recruiting candidates for a company, my very first question is, who is the legal entity? What is the actual name of the company that the paycheck is going to come from? Not only who's paying for my services, but from the candidate's perspective, when you're writing a cover or considering writing a cover letter and considering applying, where's your paycheck coming from? It's often not the same company that's advertising the job. And so this is very common in cannabis, that there might be 2 or 3 or sometimes 4 different entities. And there's often a very big disconnect between what's being put out publicly of the positions they're hiring for. I feel like especially with marketing positions, the question that goes along with who's my actual employer going to be? What's the form of the company I'm going to be working for? Who's the team? If you're applying for a marketing job, obviously it's in the marketing department, but there's a lot of jobs that don't sound, or that might have social equity or DEI in the title. And it's not clear what department is this in? Is this sales? Is this marketing? What are the expectations that, first of all, what's in the job description? But there's a lot that's not in the job description. There's a lot that's left out that needs to be figured out before you make a commitment to work for that company. So I'll just try to wrap up there. But especially, you would think like as we get closer to federal legalization, the banking issues and payroll issues would be getting better. But I feel like it's the same where we were 10, 15 years ago in California, where you're getting paid cash, or you're applying for a job with Harborside Dispensary, but your employer is a like third-party HR company or something. So there was a lot going through my mind throughout this session today along those lines of just the logistics and compliance. That goes back to a lot of what we were talking about with compliance. Make sure it's a legal job opportunity and that you're comfortable with the kind of risk you're going to be taking on, especially if you're going to be doing such valuable work and be on the front lines through marketing and branding. So, and it crosses over into, social impact and diversity plans. And it's a lot. There's so many buzzwords and keywords. We definitely don't have time to get through all of this in one session. So yeah, a lot of what we talked about today also we'll be talking more about in the December session to build a focus in more on the application and hiring process.
And just Danielle, while you're on too, and for Muna and Jill, when you've negotiated and kind of maybe your first times negotiating it and being able to actually practice it out loud and be like, no, I usually charge twice for that, or this sort of benefit, or this sort of insurance plan, or I'm not sure if either one of you have had that experience and found yourself needing to negotiate and advocate. And you're like, no, I know my worth. This is kind of what I was going for. And for Danielle, when you can, just what we could look for ahead of time, so we're prepared to have that sort of what can feel like an uncomfortable conversation. So Any insight, Jill and Muna, onto your personal experience of, and if it's okay if it hasn't had to happen or hasn't yet happened?
For a contract negotiation, or you're
For
saying that
employment negotiation, yeah.
I've done more contract negotiation, but for employee, most recently, it wasn't really so much as a negotiation. It was more of, it's such a different situation, so I can't really say, but I'll speak to contracts. That's something where it's definitely a negotiation of, okay, it's more financial negotiation, and then negotiating what is expected, what are the results, not even the results, but what is the job expectations, what you're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis, who you're reporting to, what reports are expected weekly, all that stuff. So it's negotiating what you're actually going to be doing and what's expected, what they expect. So there has to be a balance of negotiating what they expect and what you're going to do, and then how much they're going to pay you for it. So there's a balancing act there, and they always want to pay less than what you want. So, and there's that.
And hopefully after watching this, you know how much value you bring, and you're like, I got the value and value and value. So if you're looking for this sort of growth and results, value, value, value. So, and Moon, I can see you like, yes, I've been through this. I've had to experience coming from either in-house agency work or even contracted out agency work.
Yeah.
Any insight you could share on this kind of interview and negotiation process?
I would say I am a terrible negotiator when it comes to the financial side of that, this side of things. So I don't have much to offer there beyond just general negotiation tips and tactics. But something that what Danielle said made me think of before, and what Anne had mentioned before, and thinking about negotiating, which it might not be much of a negotiation, but it is like asking the right questions and seeing if there's flexibility, is if we're talking about the cannabis industry and how much social equity and DEI is wrapped into marketing. From like by and large, those are two separate things. So if they are expecting you to do both, or those are two things that are going to be interwoven at every point, you can ask the questions or negotiate. First of all, that more money should be involved. If you're doing their DEI work or that's through marketing, that definitely more money should be involved. And there's a lot of money available in terms of DEI and what cannabis companies can put towards that. But also negotiating like who creates those DEI strategies or those initiatives? Will that be something that you get to own? Sometimes you don't want to have to, you may not want to be the person who creates those DEI initiatives. So almost like separating the two roles, or kind of negotiating that. Or it may be the opposite, that you, especially if there's a lack of diversity in their team, that if you're going to be doing the marketing plans and pushing forward these initiatives, you want to be the one who's crafting them. So talking about like who develops the strategies or initiatives, at what point does it need to, like where does it get integrated in? Is it something that is just like throw it in the caption last minute, like we came up with this phrase, or is it really like a foundational part of the company? So that's kind of a mixture of like questions you should be asking, and then based on those questions kind of negotiate, like is there opportunity for flexibility if it doesn't align with what you're hoping for the role, or if there's maybe something that you feel as if you would be better structure that would be better suited for your skill set.
I just want to read Sammy's comment here, which is actually to complement a lot of what we just talked about. The best negotiating advice I ever received is to come prepared with 3 salary figures in mind. A high one that would be your dream salary, a low one that would be the least you're willing to accept, and the one you actually want, somewhere in the middle. So when they ask you for your desired salary, give them the high one and leave them room to negotiate downwards. And when you're holding them accountable, when they're talking about DEI and investing into those sort of programs, you're also putting that as part of the conversation. And the the time it takes to have an individual or a team of people to pay attention to and develop those sort of programs or initiatives or communications, both internally as a culture in your company and externally. So,
Yeah. Oh, and one thing that we haven't talked about yet, but is actually incredibly important. A lot of cannabis companies are investor-backed startups. You can 1000% negotiate or talk about what equity is available, or, I mean, if you, stock options aren't like cannabis specific. I mean, the startup world has like, that's kind of one of the things that working in a startup is known for. There's less like monetary pay, but the equity options are really valuable. Like, I would definitely ask questions about that. And if you're not familiar, I highly encourage you to do your research and learn the terminology, learn what is standard or usual, or even if they don't do it now, because some cannabis companies may be a little bit too new or haven't thought about that yet, but ask them if there's an opportunity for that in the future, or if they've been thinking about it. Because when we talk about equity, and equity in the terms of racial equity, where that comes in wealth equity, that's where it's going to come in. Like, there are people who are poised to make billions with a B on this industry, and the way for that to be dispersed is through offering like financial equity. So please, please, please do your research, look into it, and feel really confident and comfortable, and get comfortable asking for those things or talking about those things, because it is like, I mean, finance is really murky, but it can, truthfully, like, no exaggeration, it can be the difference of millions of dollars for you down the road. So definitely look into that.
Yeah, intergenerational wealth making potential opportunities here. And hopefully we can just not make the money matter such a murky moment, and like really own it, and perhaps even just talking about out loud figures and what can feel uncomfortable before you actually go in. So the more you practice it, the more you're like, nope, this is or yes, this is exactly where I was thinking, and having those numbers in mind and asking those sort of questions about equity. And I think that's beyond a 401k kind of matching thing. We're talking like a piece of the company. And a model you might, for folks who are watching and listening, is the yoga company called Shabani. Look into that as far as like employer sort of equity ownership as a model that is doing things differently as far as building a company and having employer ownership as part of it. So gonna plant that seed.
If there's ever anything that makes me more confident to or feel more of an imperative to talk about equity, just Google what like early Amazon and Microsoft investors or employees got, and when you see those numbers, you're like, yeah, what's the worst I could lose by not the worst that can happen by you mentioning it is that you don't get the job. The best case scenario is 20 years from now, you're sitting on an island, living your best life, drinking like mojitos. So like, definitely, don't let jargon and things like that intimidate you from getting what you deserve.
Definitely. Well, I just wanted or a blunt, or whichever your preferred method of consumption, if you do consume on the island, hopefully legally, especially on the US Virgin Islands. But you're right, there's nothing wrong with kind of prepping yourself and having an opportunity to ask and engage with it. So, and I just want to comment and share Danielle's comment as well. Employment lawyers will often do a free review of employment offers, so you can get their opinion on the range of benefits you can negotiate for and the language to use to ask. Thank you, Danielle. That is,
I'll just touch really quickly on that.
yeah.
I mean, that's an ideal, right? That an employment lawyer will do this for free for you, and that you'll have a good rapport with a lawyer who can help you navigate a negotiation. But that's how I've learned a lot over the years, is just conversations with lawyers and other people who have kind of like the hacks to this, or like the secret language. And so really briefly, just about equity, just be sure you're not giving up to many of the other things that you need, because they'll try to trick you into like, well, we're going to give you equity or stock options. So then you're like, oh, okay, then I don't need the health insurance. Or in other words, like, you know, are you a contractor or an employee? And when it comes to equity, I think health equity, like, what about the health insurance? And the other thing that's the same between, like, this is in the job description, sometimes it will say health insurance and stock options, but in the interview process, I don't even see it as negotiation. I see it as asking questions about the employment offer that you might be getting, to make sure that it's going to be what you think it's going to be. Because they could say stock options, but you have to pay for those. They're not handing you free equity. You might have to pay for those stock options. Same with the health insurance. How much of your health insurance monthly payment is the employer paying, or will you be paying completely out of pocket? So those are all the kinds of numbers that you need to kind of calculate what you would be accepting. And so that's how I think of negotiation, is that first step of like asking questions, just understanding what it is that you'd be agreeing to, and then just a conversation around that, like, oh, okay, I didn't know I'd have to pay this much for health insurance, so I have to factor that in. Maybe we can bump up my base salary to cover that, you know, things like that. And I'll just segue to Anne to this slide about employee handbook. Like, that's why this
Yeah.
of asking, like, you don't necessarily ask, do you have an employee handbook, but you can start to see if they do or not, based on what information they're able to give you about the situation. There's a lot of companies that somehow get by without an employee handbook, and it shows because they're completely disorganized. They don't have consistent written policies about really basic stuff that in other fields you can't get away with that. In cannabis, a lot of the HR stuff is just not there. So that's why we are doing these sessions that we do with CannaCareers, because there's just such a gap.
It is a major gap in like even just policies in place, like with your employee handbook on what's expected of you as a team member of the organization would be really helpful. But that could be a red flag, just as a heads up, as to whether or not that is something that you want to help build the company in that way, or just kind of exit stage left and be like, I'm not sure that this is going to be quite for me. Because then when there is a situation that pops up in work or in the working environment, and you're like, what do we do? That was hella inappropriate, totally not okay. Or I know this pay is not right, or, you know, having some kind of reference or resource point. And like Danielle mentioned, a lot of these companies, mostly referring to plant touching businesses from my experience, that don't necessarily have a handbook. So I don't know if anyone wants to share a little bit about any potential hostile circumstances where you've either had to de-escalate or reach out to like an employment lawyer that Danielle had graciously mentioned before. So not sure if any of that could be applicable to any of your one of yours experiences.
I wouldn't say HR, but in working or partnering with other people as a consultant, or if you've partnered with other consultants or other firms on projects, sometimes there can be, you know, problems arising when you have if you have a contract to do, you know, your agency is doing one thing, the other agency is doing another thing, and you're partnering for a client purpose, but maybe, you know, things fall short. So you have to negotiate who's going to be doing what and expectations, and so that everyone's on the same page. I've had situations where things weren't exactly the way they were supposed to be, and unfortunately we decided to part ways and not work together. But you know, before it escalated, excuse me, to a point where, you know, it just became unbearable. So I think that you have to look at that and say, you know, if you're going to work with another person or partner with another person, really take the time to get to know how they work as well. And does that benefit you? Does it complement your style as well? And I think that's really important. But I've had hostile work situations outside of the cannabis industry that, especially in the music industry, is horrible. But you know, everything from sexism, racism, all on the same day. You know, misogyny. You know, and at the time there wasn't really. You're made to feel like you can't do anything about it. You're made to feel like you just have to put up with it because you need a paycheck, and you don't. It's almost like a mind fuck because, excuse me if I could say that word, they you know, it's like the Jedi mind trick. You're there. It's almost like like you're an abused housewife. You know, you're there. You put up with it every day because you need that paycheck. But the minute you decide you don't want to do it anymore, you're going to face the pushback. You're going to face people saying, well, why are you being so sensitive? Why are you being overly aggressive? You know, I haven't had the aggressive comment thrown at me because people don't really look at me as aggressive, but they say, oh, why are you being so sensitive? You know, and it's not that you're being sensitive, it's how you feel at that time, or how you're being treated at that time is affecting how you're able to perform. So, and that's something you know, you have to look at that. If you're going to be put in a hostile situation, why would you stay there? You know, and so I think if anybody's working in any industry and you're in a hostile situation, especially now in the time that we're in, you have to speak up about it and you have to take action in some way, whether it's just quitting the job, reporting to HR. Sometimes, you know, and I know someone now, HR is not really helpful. So you have to go outside of that and maybe talk to a lawyer to see what your options are. And hopefully it doesn't get to that point, but to de-escalate, the best thing to do usually is to go to HR. If that's not helpful, then you might have to find a new job or, you know, talk to other people in your field who may have had similar experiences and find out what they do or what they have done. Because numbers, you know, when you have help in numbers, it's always a better thing than feeling like you're alone in dealing with the virus.
Jill, I'm no longer going to let you speak before me because you keep taking up all my answers. But yeah,
I'm sorry.
I mean, number one, get things in writing. That's really important. If you have an in-person or phone meeting, send a follow-up email. Something was, if you discussed something that wasn't right or that you were bringing up an issue, make sure it's in writing somewhere. That's one. Two, you build a community around you, especially if you are in an environment where you're the only person of color, only Black person, only woman, if you were the only anything, or one of few, lean on the relationships that you have with other people, whether in your company or outside of your company, but still in your industry, because there will be times, probably often if you're in a hostile work environment, where you are being told you're sensitive, you're aggressive, and you're being gaslit into believing that the issues that you're bringing up aren't real issues. So it's important to have a community around you because you can say, well, first of all, they can be honest with you, like, hey, I'm experiencing this. Is this normal? Because you don't want to jump ship to an industry-wide problem. Not to say that it's okay, but if you leave a company because one thing happens, but that's kind of standard about the cannabis industry, you're going to be searching for something that may not come, or at least not come anytime soon. So having that community that can tell you, hey, that's not okay, here's how I dealt with it, oh, that's definitely not normal, but having that is really helpful. If the environment you're in is gaslighting you. And the third, especially with the marketing and branding, don't be afraid to punt it. Like, you don't have to explain things. You don't have to be the one who is the educator. Like, really lean on like research and other sources. There will be times where you may be asked to do a campaign or use imagery or language that does not feel right and is not okay. It doesn't mean that you have to sit there in that moment and explain it. It is totally fine for you to go through the meeting and afterwards email the people who were there or talk one-on-one and say, hey, there's an article that was about this specific thing of how it's not okay. I encourage you to read it. Or actually, before we go forward with this, I would like everyone to watch this video or listen to this podcast episode to better inform what we're doing with this branding or with this specific experiential marketing campaign. Because especially if marketing is folded into DEI or impact, or social equity, you'll be asked to do more than you bargained for every step of the way. That's just the industry is new in that way. Also, just society is new into interacting with DEI in a professional setting or in a formalized setting. So don't feel as if that you if that's not your highest and best use, you don't have to be the educator in the room. And that's something that I have dealt with a lot and had to learn that it's okay to lean on other people's research and resources. That to me is common knowledge. We should not be using that language, but you can definitely share that. And then lastly, it's okay to leave. It's okay to walk away. It's normal to feel guilty. It's normal to feel as if you have no other options, but you shouldn't feel guilty and you do have options. So it's okay to leave.
So true. You come to the decision point where you're there is room for growth, that there is this actual plan in place to be improved and have leadership that is looking to learn and integrate this as part of their overall way of doing business, and or exit stage right and learned and don't have to subject yourself to what ends up very much affecting you personally. And ain't nobody need that, because this is heavy. Cannabis can be heavy in general, especially with people and the stories that they have. So those are really amazing insights and tips and experiences. I know we're coming to the end of today. We are at our wonderful 2-hour mark. It felt like 15 minutes. I feel like we could go on and bring some great additional insight. I just want to comment that Sammy had a great comment to Muna's suggestions here with offering a podcast or a piece of reference or research, and be hey, let's learn together, let's grow. And if it feels right, if it resonates with you and the particular crew that you're rolling with and working with. So specifically for dealing with microaggressions and such across the board. So true. Well, I think we're good. I don't know if anyone has anything last to say. We're at the wrap of it. We are excited that everyone was able to join, and anyone who's watching on the replay, thank you very much for taking the time and taking this content in. You can learn about Woke and CannaCareers at wocc.world. You can also learn a lot about our speakers joining us today. And I'll invite y'all to, I'll ask Muna to start with letting those who are listening and are watching how they can best find out about you and your work.
You can find out more about me and my work through my website. It is mikedion.com. So it's the letter M, my first initial, and my last name.com. So MIKEDIONWU. And that's has my bio, projects I'm working on, clients and companies in, around, and outside of cannabis that I'm so lucky to be involved with.
Nice, thank you. And Jill.
Yes, you could find out more about me if you want to reach out directly to me on LinkedIn. Jill, and my last name is Goldsberry, GOLDSBERRY, or you can reach out to me on Instagram at Golden Media Relations.
Wonderful.
Happy to talk or, meet you for a Zoom coffee.